Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's Officers Association webinar on coaching and its benefits to career transition and development. My name is Clive Lowe. I'm one of the career consultants at the Officers Association, and I will be your host this evening. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker tonight, Phil Hayes. Phil, welcome to the Officers Association.
Well, thank you, Clive. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
So Phil has got 30 years, more than 30 years actually, experience of working in the leadership development and executive coaching fields, MA in management learning. He's a neuro-linguistic programmer, master practitioner, previously operations director at the Brathay Hall Trust in the Lake District, head of management training for the BBC, and he's currently the chairman and was the original founder of a coaching company called Management Futures Consulting. A little bit more about Phil's background is on the following slide. Just to notice, particularly, he published a couple of successful books, NLP Coaching and Leading and Coaching Teams to Success. And he works at the most senior levels, and his current client list includes UK ambassadors, media heads, leaders from organisations such as Vivo, Barefoot, University College London, BBC, and so on, and currently Coca-Cola Europe. So, Phil, give us a little bit of a story of how you got into coaching in the first place.
Well, I wish I could say it was a planned, smooth transition, Clive, but the reality is it wasn't. And I wish I'd had the benefits of career coaching when I was going through some stages of my own career, to be honest with you. I began a serious career, I guess, in social work a long time ago now, back in the 70s. I worked for a number of London local authorities, and I developed into a psychiatric social worker working with some really quite disturbed and, in fact, criminally disturbed people. I did that for about 10 years. I got to a certain level of seniority there, and then one day, as a story I once told you, I just got fed up with it, and I just decided I'd had enough of this. I was very frustrated by the kind of bureaucracy of social work and some of the limitations placed on us, and it felt hard work to make progress. So I left. I just upped and left, and I found myself some weeks later working for an organisation called the Brathay Hall Trust in the Lake District, as you mentioned, where we did leadership development work. And that was very exciting. It was a very exciting transition to be working with people who wanted to develop, who wanted to learn, who wanted to grow, and to have a great environment in which we'd help them to do that. So I learned a lot about leadership there. I learned a lot about people development, and I was introduced, I did a qualification in NLP there, which was a real eye-opener. It opened my eyes to lots of different ways in which people could develop, lots of different ways in which you create very productive developmental relationships with people, and it really, I think gave impetus to my career. And as part of the job there, we did a little bit of executive coaching for individuals as well as working with teams. So I started doing a little bit of coaching there. I then joined the BBC, where I became head of the management training function. And there I started coaching in some earnest. There were a lot of disgruntled executives, media people who wanted more than anything else to talk about their own development one-to-one rather than go into a classroom situation where they had to work with other people. There's a lot of individualism there. So I found myself sitting down having 2-hour conversations with some media bigwigs, and realizing that this was something quite important. I decided to learn about it, and so I did some reading around the subject, started to familiarize myself with what good coaching practice really was, and got a handle really on how to approach coaching sessions in a fairly business-like way. At which point I thought, I like this coaching. This is really effective. I could see it worked. I could see people getting results quite quickly. I could see people making the changes they want to make. I could see it having impact. So I was rather excited by that. And I began to think I could do this for myself. And so in 1994, I left and I formed a little company. It's called Phil Hayes Associates, very, very modest, one-horse company. And I had a very happy few years there. And then in 1997, I joined forces with a couple of colleagues, and we founded Management Futures. And we got into the coaching market very early in the game. So we started around 1997 coaching people and learning how to train people in coaching skills, which was very early in the market in the UK. So we were, to some degree, sort of pioneers in an emerging market. Coaching wasn't as widely used or known about then as it is now. There's been a huge development, as we'll talk about a little bit later.
So Phil, so what exactly is coaching?
Well, it's a really good question, and the honest answer is that nobody owns the definition of coaching. There is no kind of legal proprietary definition, but it has emerged as a helping technique, and it's drawn from lots and lots and lots of other disciplines. I particularly have taken inspiration from sports psychology. I've got a keen interest in sport. My company works in professional sport quite a lot, and we have learned a lot from the kind of mindsets and attitudes that underpin successful sporting achievement. So there's definitely one strand of coaching which comes from sports coaching. Another definitely comes from counselling, where some of the key principles of, in particular, person-centered counselling have translated into coaching. I'm happy to explain that jargon a bit more if people want to ask. Mentoring is another source which has led into coaching, and all these things to some degree do overlap. Coaching has some distinct features which I think we'll talk about a little bit later on. So if I move on to the next bullet point, coaching has changed out of all recognition in the UK in the last 10 to 20 years. When I began coaching, it was a little bit of a dark secret, actually, almost a rumour. There was so little of it around, and there was almost, at that point, a whiff of stigma attached to coaching. There was a sort of popular prejudice that if you needed coaching, there was something wrong with you. So right. Coaching was sort of seen as remedial. It was very problem focused. What's happened, and I think it's an extremely positive development. What has happened in recent years is that coaching has been embraced far more as a developmental tool. There's no longer any shame in getting a coach. In fact, some people boast about their coaches and how expensive their coach is. You know, so the whole ethos has rather changed. But it's now very much more mainstream. Virtually all decent-sized organisations use coaching in some form, be it by hiring in external coaching expertise, developing their own internal coaching resource, or some kind of mixed economy of that sort. So it's very much part of the scenery in most UK organisations, and increasingly so abroad as well. In terms of organisational life, as it were, coaching is used as a developmental tool to help people to grow in their careers and to grow in their roles. So there's a lot of management coaching now, where managers will learn some fundamental coaching skills and will use those skills to help grow their teams, grow their staff, help them to fulfill their potential, help them to think more for themselves, help them to develop their competence. So it's used in a wide variety of situations in organisational life. And one of the key applications, and I guess the focus of this evening, is its use as a career planning and career developmental tool.
Right. So we hear a lot about the two words, coaching and mentoring. They tend to be put together.
Well, they do.
So what are the differences and what are the similarities between them?
Well, there are a number of similarities. I mean, typically, I guess, at a very basic level, you'll see two people sitting in chairs talking to each other. So there won't be much difference in how the conversation looks from a distance, as it were. Traditionally, I should say, mentoring has been where somebody with greater experience, probably greater expertise, maybe a level of seniority, takes somebody under their wing and passes on some of their experience. So that, if you like, they're a kind of guiding hand. And typically mentors have been employed when people have joined organizations. They often get given a mentor as somebody who can help them to find their feet, help them to find their way around, literally, help them to find their way around politically, help them to work out how to flourish in an organization. And I guess the key element of mentoring that makes it different from coaching is that when you're a mentor, it's assumed that you have greater knowledge or expertise than the mentee, than the person being coached. Coaching is rather different. Coaching is a non-subject expert technique. It means that anybody, in theory, if they know how to coach, can coach anybody else without having expertise in their domain. So for example, I've coached people in the nuclear industry. I can promise you I know very little about nuclear science. I've coached NHS senior consultants. I'm not a brain surgeon, but I've coached brain surgeons. I've coached diplomats. I don't know the first thing about how to run an embassy, but I've helped people to think through how they will run an embassy. And the whole point of this is that coaching is a non-expert enterprise, in as much as you don't have to have subject matter expertise. What you do have to have expertise in is how to help people think through their own scenarios. So coaching is very much centered on that.
We've got an interesting question here.
Sure.
That's come in. So can everyone be coached?
Well, I guess in theory there's no limit to who can be coached, but I think in practice, if you're going to benefit from coaching, you need to have some motivation to be coached. If you're dead set against being coached, you can't coach somebody against their will. So there has to be some motivation to be on the receiving end of coaching. And there has to be some ownership of your own agenda, by which I mean it has to be stuff which you yourself take responsibility for. So if, for example, somebody says they don't need to learn anything, they don't need to develop, that they have no ways of improving, it's very unlikely with that attitude they're going to be open to a coaching approach. Right. So it's predicated on the motivation and the ownership of the coachee, if I can use that rather clumsy word. Right. So I'm saying these are some of the differences, that there are overlaps in coaching and mentoring and counselling and other helping kind of conversations. What we're finding increasingly is that good mentors are using coaching approaches. So these days, a mentor will not only pass on their expertise, but they'll also use coaching tools to help their mentees to do thinking for themselves, and they'll provoke them to think, that they will encourage them to identify challenges, identify changes they want to make, and by using skillful questions and other coaching techniques, they'll help them to do some good thinking about their own issues. There's much less spoon feeding goes on in mentoring than there used to be. So coaching has many applications really, and there are so many scenarios around which I personally coach, but I know that we are looking now particularly at coaching it with relevance to career. And if I just highlight some of the benefits I think of how coaching can benefit people's career, the number one thing I think is it gives you the opportunity to clarify your thinking. Many people, and there is some research on this actually, many people, they do insufficient career planning. And some people, it's been reckoned that some people spend more time planning their holidays than they do their career. And I rather believe that to be true, actually. People have not often had the opportunity to think in a structured way about what they want to get from their career, how they're going to reach their aspirations, and how they're going to set goals which are going to help them to reach their overall career ambitions. And coaching is an opportunity to really do that. It gives you an opportunity to identify what you want, how you're going to get there, and what the detailed plan is going to be to reach your aims. So a feature of a lot of coaching around career is this long-term approach. The idea that you don't just think about what the next job is going to be, but you might think about where do you want to be at the end of your career and work back from there. So you have a big picture, which the more detailed plans form a part. And I think that's very important, because some people kind of zigzag through their careers. They spot a job and they think, oh, I'll go for that, without really thinking about the big picture. Coaching gives people the opportunity to really think broadly about what they're trying to achieve in their professional lives, and that gives their shorter term decisions much more focus. And I've got a bullet point here about the whole person approach, and this might sound rather kind of idealistic in a way, but the ethos of coaching is that any decision is not just about a kind of logical set of questions and considerations. We have to take into account the whole person, by which we mean the individual's personality, their background, their thinking style, their culture, their taste, if you like, the kind of person that they are, because who they are has a real impact on the right decision for them. So what might be a good decision for you, Clive, say, might not be a good decision for me. Indeed, just because of our uniqueness and our individuality. Yeah. And so the whole person approach includes treating each and every person as an individual, and that means not being tempted as a coach just to go for one-size-fits-all solutions. It's about helping people to find a real bespoke solution, a real bespoke path that suits them and fits them well. And if I just move on down the slide, I guess one very important aspect of that is how important it is for people to understand their own professional values in career development. I know values is rather a big, vague word, but in coaching, we take it to mean those things which really matter to the individual. And sometimes they're big, idealistic things like service, and the sort of values that no one can argue with. And other times they're much more personal, individual. They might be things like adventure, or excitement, or fun, or creativity, or working in teams, things which are really quite personal to that individual. What we found is that people that experience the most satisfaction in their careers are almost always the people who feel that their values are very present in the career choices they've made. I've sat with a lot of people, particularly when they reach significant birthdays, say with a 0 on the end, who are disgruntled because they can do what they can do. They're competent. They go from one job to another because they can do them. But just because they're competent doesn't mean they're fulfilled. You know, and they can be quite good at things because they're able people, but they don't feel fulfilled because their values aren't being met. So we spend a lot of time when we're thinking about long-term career development, helping people to be really clear about what's important to them personally. And the same is true of strengths. We come across a lot of people in career conversations who they're good at things, but the things they're good at aren't necessarily good for them. So I quite frequently find people who are very, very able, but what they're good at doesn't motivate them, doesn't energize them, doesn't fulfill them. In fact, it might have the opposite effect. It might drain them, it might demotivate them and de-energize them. So we have a number of tools and instruments we can use to help people to identify their true strengths. There's one very interesting, quite new tool actually, called R2, which you can get online, which helps you to identify strengths in 4 different domains. One domain is what they call your realized strengths, and this is kind of your sweet spot. So these are the strengths which you're good at, and they're good for you when you use them. But they also help you to identify your what they call your learned strengths, and these are the things which you're good at, but they're not good for you. They help you to identify your weaknesses. I like the fact they're very frank. They call it your weakness. They're things which you're not good at, and they're not good for you. These are things which you should just try and avoid doing. And there's also a kind of developmental part of the model which gets you to identify your unrealized strengths, things which you could be good at if you did more of them, and they would be good for you. So that's your kind of development area.
So that's called R2?
That's called R2, and it's published by a body called the Centre for Applied Positive Psychology. Quite a mouthful. If you Google CAPP, you'll find R2 on their website. It costs you a few pounds to use it, I have to be honest, but it gives you so much data on the strengths part of your toolkit, as it were, and gives you lots of information about how you can identify your strengths and use them properly in your career thinking.
Right, interesting, yeah.
I guess on a more kind of transactional, practical level, we do lots of coaching, helping people to prepare their CVs and to prepare for interviews or prepare to do presentations, which are part of the actual business of getting the job that you want, and that tends to be very practical. We do lots of rehearsal, give people lots of feedback, give people lots of actually hints and tips about what's known to work. So some of that is, it crosses over into a little bit of tuition mixed in with the coaching. And something which has come up for me a lot frequently, particularly in the diplomatic service, is this idea of the first 100 days, helping people to think about how are they going to handle that transition. So if you imagine you're a diplomat and you're being sent to some remote country, and it's a new decision, so it's a new position, new team, new culture, new political situation. How are they going to handle that? How are they going to handle the local politicians? How are they going to handle the new team, etc.? And getting them very clear about what they're going to do there.
Phil, do you think coaching is suitable for every situation, or is it more appropriate in some situations than others? And are there situations when you wouldn't use coaching, you would avoid it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer to that, Clive, is that coaching is most important when you're considering important change. So I find that change is change is at the heart of coaching. Where there is no need or desire to change, coaching is rather weak and often irrelevant. Where people want to navigate, create, design, plan a change properly, that's where coaching really comes into its own. And I think to answer the sort of the negative questions, when shouldn't you coach? I don't think you should coach when there's any suggestion that people have issues which are probably more suited to a therapeutic sort of situation, or whether where somebody is perhaps not well, and that the illness might be that there might be something to do with illness or mental well-being. So coaching is posited on the fact that somebody is normally functioning. So how does it work? Well, there are a number of ways in which coaching is utilised in the UK at the moment. I guess the tradition that I've been part of is what we'd call formal executive coaching, and this is normally where somebody would sign up for a series of sessions, normally a short series of coaching sessions. We find that something like 4 to 6 sessions is a typical number, and the length of each session is usually something like 90 minutes to 2 hours. And the idea is these sessions will be spread out over a period of weeks or even months, and it'd be a very solid process by which we identify the transition that somebody's going through, where we look at what their targets are, what they want to change, what they want to achieve, and we start plotting our way carefully through all the different scenarios that help them to create good plans. So that's a very sort of formal approach to coaching, and that's where coaching has developed initially in the UK, if you like. What's happening now is coaching is proliferating, and there are all sorts of different ways of which coaching is being employed. One interesting development is the idea of speed coaching in organizations. That's something which has just started to happen in the last few years. What will happen there is an organization will book a coach for a day or more days, and will offer slots which people in the organization could sign up for. And typically they're slots of 45 minutes or so. The coach will just meet one person after another. The stipulation is that person arrives with an issue that they want to discuss. And so they come with something they want to discuss, and then the coach helps them to work their way through the issue.
I imagine coaching is quite stressful, mentally stressful. So in a speed coaching for the coach, in a speed coaching scenario, would you find that the coach is probably exhausted by the time he's had 3 or 4?
Coaches vary, actually, Clive, in the way they like to work, and some coaches really like the pace of speed coaching. I quite like it, actually. I quite like having a fresh face every 45 minutes, and something fresh to work on. Others like to take a far slower, more considered approach. So I say it's a bit about your personal preference. Coaching is getting faster all the time. And we've even got this thing called corridor coaching now. We wrote a little book recently called the Little Book of Corridor Coaching. And really this is about how you have a coaching conversation when somebody says, Clive, you've got 5 minutes. Is there something I'd like to discuss with you? And you know that your advice is going to be redundant. It's not going to be the most effective way of helping them. But you can have a structured coaching conversation within a few minutes if you know what you're doing. And we're finding that more and more managers in particular are welcoming the idea that they can coach somebody in quite a structured way in a very brief time because they haven't got time.
Is that a learned skill or something that you...
It's a learned skill. It's a learned skill. Essentially, all coaching works to the same kind of process. So if I give you a nutshell description of how a coaching session might work, there's usually a fairly open part of the discussion at the top of a coaching conversation where people just tell you what they want to talk about and where they describe something about themselves and the situation they're in. Coaching then gets very focused when you ask them what the key issue is they wish to explore and what their goal for the coaching session is. And we're very big on having a goal for each coaching conversation, which gives it traction and it gives it a center that you can structure a conversation around. Once you've got a goal, then you can start to be exploratory. You can open up the conversation. You can look at options. You can explore values. You can look at different scenarios that people want to explore. And then all good coaching conversations finish with what next? What's going to be the action that falls out of this? So there is a structure which underpins every kind of conversation. And sometimes you've got ages to explore. You might have an hour or two, and sometimes you only have minutes. But the same kind of structure still applies.
Okay.
All of this is predicated on some assumptions that we make as a coach about the nature of coaching and what it's there for. And the number one aspect of mindset really that underpins successful coaching is that you believe that people can make progress. You believe in the ability of the coachee, even when they seem to be struggling a bit. So you yourself probably know, Clive, that when somebody believes in you, it helps you to gain confidence. It helps you to take perhaps bold steps, to perhaps push yourself a little bit. When people don't believe in you, the opposite tends to be true.
Indeed, yes,
so the underpinning attitude that underpins coaching is we take a default view that people can succeed, and unless proved otherwise. So we're quite persistent in finding perhaps resources that our clients have forgotten about, things that they could do that they hadn't realized they could do, looking at other options they could pursue that perhaps they hadn't thought about before. But in essence, we maintain belief in them, even if they seem a bit stuck. That's quite tough. It's probably tougher to do than to write on a page like this, but it's fundamental in terms of mindset. And we avoid advice almost entirely. We avoid advice anyway, and this matters because of what we said before about the individual nature of the clients that we have. Advice is very rarely one size fits all. Advice that works for me, for example, may not work for you, and because we have different personalities and different circumstances, we do need to think things through for ourselves, unless there's something which is blindingly obvious, which has been missed. So if I have some important piece of information that somebody needs to know, fine, I'll offer it. But by and large, we don't offer advice. We listen, we ask good questions, we provoke, sometimes we challenge, we sometimes use tools and techniques which help people to think about things in different, more original ways. But what we're really trying to do is help people to do their best thinking. That's what we're there to do. We're there to facilitate people's best thinking in quite a structured way. And it all depends on something needing to change, people wanting something to change. If there's no change, there's no coaching. So the whole thing is predicated on the assumption that somebody wants to make a positive change for themselves. In career planning, that change is often quite evident. They want to make the best of their career opportunities. They want to create the right kind of career trajectory for themselves. But change is at the heart of coaching. We've already mentioned that we take a unique kind of bespoke approach to each person. We never assume one-size-fits-all solutions. So we bear in mind the individual at all times. And we don't impose our own agenda. We take it as being absolutely vital that the coachee brings their own subject matter, that they absolutely are committed to exploring their own agenda, and that we don't presume to know what that is. So we take quite a lot of time to clarify with the coachee what the agenda is for their coaching. And finally, we take a very adult to adult kind of egalitarian approach. So if you go and see the doctor, there's usually some assumption that the doctor has seniority in the conversation, that they know and you don't. If you go and see a mentor, there's usually the assumption that the mentor has seniority or expertise that you don't. In coaching, it's not like that. You work as partners, you both assume you know something, and you're there to work together on one person's issue. So it's very much about being frank, it's very much about being honest, it's very much about being trustworthy in the relationship, so that you can have a productive conversation which both people participate in equally.
Okay.
So that all makes sense?
It does to me, yes. Yeah.
So we're just going to look briefly at the fundamental skills that go into a coaching approach. All of these things are things which most people can do to a greater or lesser extent. Most people can create some rapport. Most of us have got good relationships in at least some part of our lives. Most of us can listen. The key to all these things that we're highlighting here, those 6 points here, is that we want those skills to be polished to the maximum degree. So, for example, if you're good at creating rapport with some people, but not others, how do you develop your rapport skills so that you can create rapport and partnership with a wide range of people? That would, if we're teaching coaching skills, that's what we'd concentrate on, looking at how you can create rapport, expand your repertoire. Most people that we train as coaches are good at listening to some things and then not so good at others. So, for example, some people we work with are great at taking in lots and lots and lots of factual information, but don't really listen for emotional issues. Other people are very good at listening for emotions, but they forget the core facts. They get a bit lost in the story of the coachee. So we train people to listen at depth to what is said and to what is not said, which is kind of quite an interesting dimension of the whole coaching task, keeping an ear out for what perhaps has not been addressed. So, for example, if I just give you one simple example, I sometimes hear people who talk very logically about their dilemmas and about their issues and don't mention their feelings, whereas in fact feelings are a very important part of decision making, as we'll discuss a little later. You need to be able to summarize, which is something which most people can do but very rarely do. It's an underused skill, but it tells the person that you're coaching that you're listening, and it keeps you on track. So it's an important part of the skill set. We like to teach our coaches to use very powerful questions as opposed to what we might call conventional questions. And in a nutshell, powerful questions are usually rather short, they're rather pointed, and they're normally very open. So there'll be things like, what is the issue? What is your goal? What's happening at the moment? What choices do you have? How will you decide? What happens if things go wrong? What plans do you have? So they're very straightforward, open questions, but they encourage the coachee to do the thinking.
Right.
Just very briefly, we make sure that every coaching session has a goal to it. That's what drives coaching, that somebody knows what they want to get out of the session. So it doesn't just wander, it has a core, which is about what the person wants to achieve in the session. And finally, we take time to contract with every coachee we have. And what that means is we set our expectations out right at the start, what the coachee can expect from the coach, and what the coach needs from the coachee for it to be a productive partnership. So everything is very clearly set out before we start to coach. I just wanted to say a very brief thing about neuroscience. Neuroscience is something which is gaining hold as an important body of thought in this country and in many other countries. And neuroscience has got a lot to say about coaching. And I'm pleased to say that neuroscience is really confirming and corroborating a lot of the things that we've been doing instinctively in coaching for many years, and it's validating some of the approaches that we've taken. Three key concepts here. One is the idea of neuroplasticity. It's the idea that our brain and our mind continues to develop even when we get old. We don't stop developing. The brain is constantly mutable. It's constantly open to change, and there's a lot of evidence now that coaching helps people to develop their thinking. It helps them actually to develop new neural pathways. It helps them to think better, partly because the relationship in coaching allows people to relax, to concentrate, to focus, and to think in a free way about their issues without too much time pressure and without having to please anybody except themselves. So there's lots to do with the partnership, which neuroscience is telling us is important to the impact of coaching. And I think the final very key point around neuroscience, it's confirming that we need to have both thoughts and feelings in our decision making. Career planning is full of decision making. Many people have a belief that decisions are made logically. Neuroscience says this is not the case, that there's a huge emotional component to decision making. Normally, in fact, decisions are made, in fact, I think most neuroscientists would argue virtually always decisions are made emotionally first, and then we use our intellect to justify our decision. So if you go to buy a house, for example, you may have made a to-do list, not a to-do list, you may have made a pros and cons list of all the things you want from a house, and then you walk in and it's yes or no within a few minutes. Something about your emotional makeup says this feels like home. And you make an emotionally based decision, and then you start to justify it with your intellect. The key that we found in decision making around career in coaching is that you need to engage both the intellect and the emotion. They're both important, and they need to work together. So we've evolved one or two quite interesting tools for helping people to understand the emotional aspect of their decision making and to be able to access that quite easily.
Quite interesting, because I've heard that appropriate for our people attending this webinar is that at interviews, the interview panel will make up its mind within 30 seconds whether to employ you or not.
That's absolutely
and then
true.
Spend the rest of the interview justifying
that's
that
exactly
decision.
That's very, very true. And that just shows actually how quickly we make decisions emotionally. It's also why, as a coach, you need to be good at creating rapport, because if your coachee takes against you in the first 30 seconds, you're very unlikely to create the kind of relationship that's going to underpin a good coaching relationship. So you need to be able to make rapport with people quickly and reliably in order to set the foundation for a good coaching conversation. Now, qualifications are becoming an increasingly important part of the coaching scene. If you want to practice coaching skills as a manager, you don't really need any qualifications. It's good to get some training. If you plan to coach on a wider front, perhaps you want to do a little bit of professional coach, or even set yourself up as an executive coach or a career coach, you do need to look for qualifications which have real credentials. And we would recommend that you look for an organisation that offers them, that has some national or even international recognition. I've put some names up on the slide of organisations which are reputable and which offer reliable and well thought of qualifications. It's useful to note if any particular organisation has any quality awards from any of these organisations, because that's usually a sign that they've been benchmarked by a very reputable organisation. So my organisation, for example, we have a quality award from the EMCC, which is the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. They've offered us a quality award at a high level, and that gives us some credibility in the qualifications that we offer.
Are any of these acronyms post-nominals that people could put after their name?
Yes, they are. They're things which you can say. You can say you have an ICF accredited qualification. You can indeed, and ditto all the other organisations too. This is a matter of personal belief, really. But in my own company, we have a belief in qualifications which have a real practical orientation. It's possible to do a master's degree in coaching and understand lots and lots of underlying theory and not be very good at coaching. We've seen this time and time again with people who've sought to work with us and they've waved their qualifications at us, and we've asked them to coach us, and their coaching's been atrocious.
Okay.
I'm just being frank with you. On our programs, we go for a very practical orientation. Coaching is a real world activity. It's about real people having real conversations about real things, real careers, for example. So our training is very practical. It's very much about building skill. It's very much about building confidence in your ability to explore an issue with people and to help them do their best thinking. It has some theoretical background and it has some theoretical underpinning, but a practical orientation is essentially what the market is looking for. If you're thinking about selling yourself as a coach, organizations that buy coaches, they want people that can create change for their people. So they take a firmly practical approach, and that's our approach too. And if you're looking to take on a course, we recommend that you ask around for people around their experience. If people have been on courses, get their experience, ask them to make recommendations so that you've got some personal backing to it, to the claims that any organisation might have about their credentials.
I think if it's okay with you, Phil, can I invite you to summarise what we've covered today?
Yeah.
And then if there are any more questions, I've got a couple of other questions I'll bring on at the end.
Sure,
okay.
Sure. Well, what I hope we've covered is just a little bit about the origins and development of coaching. And I think where I want to underpin with that is that coaching is very unlikely to be a fad. In fact, it's not a fad. It's been around now in this country alone for about 30 years, and all the indicators are of continued growth and continued usage. We've looked a little bit at how coaching compares to other kinds of conversation like mentoring and counselling. I hope we've looked at some of the ways in which coaching had kind of practical application to career thinking, career planning, and career development. We've looked a little bit about some of the variations on coaching. So, for example, executive coaching, speed coaching, and so on. We've looked a bit at the underpinning principles around attitudes and mindset. We've looked at the core underpinning skills. We've had a little glimpse into what neuroscience is telling us about the kind of underpinning science of coaching, and we've looked at qualifications briefly. So I'll be more than happy to expand upon any of those points if anybody has further questions. I know there are one or two questions already that we've had established.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Just a couple of questions then. What's the criteria for judging whether coaching has worked? How would you know that when you have coached somebody or somebody has been coached, that the coacher or the coachee would know that that's been successful?
And there are a number of different dimensions to that, because organizations are continuously trying to measure the impact of coaching. They often invest in coaching, they want to know what they're getting for their money. Now, that's come quite a long way in recent years. So there are some organizations like the CIPD, the Chartered Institute for Personal Development, who have done extensive research on multiple organizations looking at investment on their people's development, and coaching now scores higher by a long way as a form of personal development or professional development than any other tool. So coaching outperforms training, for example, by quite a long way. So in an organizational context, we're getting more knowledge about how effective coaching can be. On a one-to-one basis, the simple way of checking that coaching is effective is do people feel that the goals they set at the start of the coaching have been achieved? And B, do they go on to take the action that they said they were going to take? So do they do what they say they were going to do? And coaching helps to hold people account to this. So if for example, you coach me and we create an action plan, one of the things that I'd expect from you as a coach is that you might follow up with me and you check that I've done what I said I was going to do, because I said it was important to do it. So the goal focus on coaching keeps it relatively easy to assess on a person-to-person benefit. I still think there's a long way to go in terms of demonstrating organizational value for money, but the evidence is mounting.
Right. What other questions have you asked? How do you see coaching developing in the future? 20 years ago, it was more about trying to help somebody who had a problem, that's what you were telling us.
Yes.
Now it's developed into being a helpful tool, particularly where change is needed. How do you see the future of coaching?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. And it's developed very quickly, really, in recent years. I think 20 years ago, not only was it quite problem-focused and quite remedial, it was also quite elitist.
Right.
There was a sense that, coaching was for the good and the great, and often it was a reserve for the boss or for the people at the top of an organization. coaching is becoming much more democratic. It's becoming much more accessible. There's a huge amount of managerial coaching that goes on now. I'd say that coaching is one of the core skill sets for anybody that's going into management or leadership. So many more people have access to coaching than they used to have. There are proliferations of niches, if you like, of coaching. So people are setting themselves up in all sorts of little niches of coaching. I know people who are expatriate coaches, for example. They only coach expats, people who are making transitions to a new country. I know people who coach only around maternity, would you believe? So how you manage the whole process of maternity, of disengaging perhaps from your organization, of re-engaging. That's a niche that's growing up. People indeed are niche career coaches. There are some people that set up only to coach around career. There are some people who coach only in particular sectors. So there are people who specialize, for example, in coaching in health or in education, or in some other particular niche kind of organization. So that's happening. Lots of proliferation of different sort of niches of coaching, democratization, if I can use that rather clumsy word. And I think the other thing is that coaching is becoming much faster. There's now much more known about what works in coaching. Coaching used to be, I think, a little bit laboured, if I'm honest with you. It could be quite a ponderous, long-winded thing. And now coaching is getting much better, getting right to the crux of what needs to be addressed. Lots and lots of interesting tools being developed to help people to think better, to help people explore different aspects of their own scenarios. So I think coaching becomes more flexible, becomes faster and more accessible. So I see the time when virtually everybody will expect to be coached in some aspect of their work or their lives, or both.
Thank you, Phil. That's fascinating, and thank you very much indeed.
Well, it's a great area to be working in. And if I can, I just say one bottom line, Clive, which I haven't actually said. The thing that really keeps me going, I've been coaching a long, long time, is that coaching absolutely works. You can see people make changes. You can see people achieve goals. You can see people overcome obstacles. You can see people growing and developing, and you can see it happening relatively quickly. So it's a very fulfilling thing to be doing for a living. And it's also great to train other coaches. So that's why I do it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Phil.
You're very welcome.
Before we say goodnight to you, I just wanted to advise you of our next webinar. Same time next Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday, the 13th of February. Our guest speaker will be Ed Gaffney. Ed served for 17 years in the Mercian Regiment and then joined Amazon as an operations manager in early 2017. He is going to discuss transferable skills needed for roles in operations management and should be providing some valuable advice on CVs, applications, and on interviews. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Phil, thank you very much for being our speaker. It's very much appreciated.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, Clive. Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
You're most welcome. And thank you all very much, and a very good night to you all.